Ta-Nehisi quote has recently become very controversial, which I think is a bit misaligned, since I think he has been controversial for decades now. But what has recently happened, there were two instances, basically. I think yesterday or the day before, he has been on a podcast with Trevor Noah, where he said if he grew up in Gaza, he would basically join the people on October 7th in committing the atrocities. He didn't say it in those words, but he basically said he would join people on October 7th. Before that, he had a new book that was coming out. I think it came out on October 1st. The book is called The Message. It's mostly about the reflections he took, or it's based on the reflections on his visits to the Iraq, Chapin, and the West Bank and East Jerusalem. The book mainly focuses on his visits to the Palestinian territories, where he compares most of it to Jim Crow and to the South during the Jim Crow era. Basically, he makes sure to use apartheid many times. So for those who don't know, he has won many awards. He is basically like a best-selling author, and even in the interview we'll go through, the moderator that is pushing against him basically starts the interview by saying he does admire him and he likes he likes his works. He likes what he did for decades, but he just had a few problems with his most recent book. So we'll be going through the CBS interview, and we'll also then go through a few clips from his Trevor Noah appearance. So I think it might be the best to go to the interview straight away, but I want to just check if anyone wants to say anything before.
Well, could you jump in that, some of our, Kirk, I'll say some of our international viewers may or may not know exactly who this guy is. He's a really influential leftist. I think it's pretty safe to say kind of came into the real national spotlight during the BLM movement. But Daniel, as you said, I mean, he's been around for quite some time and he's highly respected. I mean, he is not seen as kind of this out there, crazy, like a Cenk Uygur guy. This guy is in the mainstream, very highly respected academic. It's a lot of kudos and invites. And I think it's what makes his perspective. I mean, I just have to say the fact that he would join not the Nova Festival. He wouldn't join the kids dancing. He wouldn't join like the kibbutzim where they are working, and he would join the Hamas attackers. I mean, roll the tape, but what the hell kind of response could you possibly even have?
Kirk, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, I think just to clarify, I think we're going to get to the clip, but I don't think he said he would have joined. I think what he was saying was he doesn't think that if he were in that position, he would have been like, he would have been better than what they did. I think that he was just kind of like unsure about it, which is still really horrible, but I'm sure we'll eventually get to the clip.
So let's watch the CBS interview. It's about 5 minutes. So I think we'll go through parts of it. And I'll stop at some parts, so let's just listen a bit.
Ta-Nehisi, I want to dive into the Israel-Palestine section of the book. It's the largest section of the book. And I have to say, when I read the book, I imagine if I took your name out of it, took away the awards and the acclaim, took the cover off the book, the publishing house goes away, the content of that section would not be out of place in the backpack of an extremist. And so then I found myself wondering, why does Ta-Nehisi Coates, who I've known for a long time, read his work for a long time, very talented, smart guy, leave out so much? Why leave out that Israel is surrounded by countries that want to eliminate it? Why leave out that Israel deals with terror groups that want to eliminate it? Why not detail anything of the first and the second intifada, the cafe bombings, the bus bombings, the little kids blown to bits? And is it because you just don't believe that Israel, in any condition, has a right to exist?
Well, I would say the perspective that you just outlined, there is no shortage of that perspective in American media. That's the first thing I would say. I am most concerned always with those who don't have a voice, with those who don't have the ability to talk. I have asked repeatedly in my interviews whether there is a single network, mainstream organization in America with a Palestinian American bureau chief or correspondent who actually has a voice to articulate their part of the world. I've been a reporter for 20 years. The reporters of those who believe more sympathetically about Israel and its right to exist don't have a problem getting their voice out. But what I saw in Palestine, what I saw on the West Bank, what I saw in Haifa in Israel, what I saw in the South Hebron Hills, those were the stories that I have not heard. And those were the stories that I was most occupied with. I wrote a 260-page book. It is not a treatise on the entirety of the conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis.
But if you were to
So I have many things to say about that part, but I think Michael hasn't actually seen the interview before, so he saw it for the first time. So I just want to quickly ask Michael, what do you think? Are the pro-Palestinian crowds not getting enough voice when it comes to sort of public image?
Well, I guess this author doesn't know anything about the current U.S. college campuses and the fact that the Democratic National Convention happily sponsored anti-Israel, pro-Hamas, pro-death to America. People actually saying that at the DNC, and it was perfectly well. That's okay. That's free speech. That's great. We're proud of that in America. We want people shouting death to America. I would shout to them, go leave, goodbye. We don't want people who want to kill us here. But I think he's obviously lying. I mean, all of the major networks in the US, except for Fox News, probably are pro-Palestinian or always talking about this. What's remarkable is nothing that he did, at least from what I've read about him, nothing that he talked about ever blamed any of the people living in Gaza for the fact that billions have come into the country and have mostly been used to structure what the London Underground would be very jealous of, which is probably one of the most impressive tunnel networks in the world. Of course, they're all military networks, but that is not their fault. And I'm sure if you were around when Adolf Hitler was running Nazi Germany, he would focus on the plight of the poor German people, not the fact that they elected him to lead them, and not the fact that they intended to overrun all of Europe and hopefully to defeat America. So this is obviously his position is absurd. The last thing I'll say, and I just want to remind all of our viewers, just because the majority of people think something is true doesn't make it so. In Bill Maher's beautiful, cynical comment, just because the majority of people voted that obesity is not a disease doesn't mean it's not a disease. Now, that's a silly comment, but it's very telling about the stupidity of current discourse, which is if a majority think of something, there is right and wrong. And it's very clear that people who elected Hamas, and these people elected Hamas, and they destroyed what was Gaza when Israel left. And they decided to spend all this money on the disaster of a country, which is effectively a military base. Almost the entirety of Gaza is a military base. So he's smoking something. And to get back finally to your point, most of the American press is pro-Hamas pro-Gaza and the poor people living in Gaza, and don't kind of gloss through the fact that Hamas unleashed 6,000 terrorists. Well, sorry, only 3,800 terrorists plus 2,200 not terrorists that just happened to go into Israel and help the terrorists into Israel to abduct, kill, slaughter, rape, maim, behead, and so on Israelis.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, I'm currently reading a book by Orson Scott Card. It's about basically a boy who can shift between different realities, between different dimensions. And I'm kind of wondering if I did that in last 5 minutes or something, because the way he talks about, there's no voice for the pro-Palestinian crowd. Well, either, as I've said, maybe I'm in a different reality, or maybe, I just haven't checked the news and we are much more pro-Israeli than I think. Or the way he considers basically being a pro-Palestinian is, if you believe that Israel should exist, you are too much pro-Israeli. If you think that basically what has happened on October 7 was a bad thing, you are too much pro-Israeli. Those are the two alternatives. Either, we are living in a different dimension, we are basically looking at a different reality, or, he considers things like this as basically bad things. Jonathan?
Yeah, did I mishear? But basically, what I heard him say was that there's no Palestinian or Palestinian American bureau chiefs, so that
So he mentioned something like, I think, like on staff, like responders.
right, right.
Yeah.
I mean, but yeah, I mean, to me, it is just so ugly racism. It is judging people's ideas based on, well, if they're Palestinian or Palestinian American, of course they have these ideas. I would point out that some of the biggest advocates for Israel on the Ayn Rand Center UK channel have no Jewish background at all, but they're about ideas. So, there's just such an ugly racism, I think, about how this guy understands and interprets the world. And we'll get more into it, but it's evident from the get-go.
Yeah, and from what I've heard, Mossab Hassan Youssef is happy to go on any show he's invited to. So if you want to hear the Palestinian voice or someone, having that background, you can listen to that. But I don't think that's the people he wants. Kirk?
Yeah, I was going to say that you really see the altruism come out here a bit. Oh, well, why are you dropping all this context? Why aren't you talking about, and then his whole thing is, well, I want to speak up for the voiceless and, the Palestinians, they're poor and downtrodden. And, you get the implication that, well, then their voice, whatever gripes or grievances they may have, they are totally legitimate. And who cares what about the Israeli perspective or about all the ugly history of Palestinian attacks against Israel or whatever.
And why are they downtrodden? Maybe there's the ideas that they're pursuing.
And to go to Michael's point, Godwin's Law Alert, he brought up Hitler and the Nazis. When watching these interviews, also the Trevor Noah interviews, I was thinking how is this any different than Tucker Carlson having that goof Daryl Cooper on a few weeks ago, which I know I was on for the show when we talked about that. And, Daryl Cooper, he's like, look, I'm not saying the Nazis were the good guys. I'm just saying Churchill was the real bad guy of World War II. And did we ever think about this? The mainstream media, and there's all these books about the Holocaust and how bad the Nazis were. But did we ever think about things from the perspective of the average Joe German leading up to the Third Reich? And you just see similarities with Mr. Coates and his perspective on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Let's listen to a bit more.
To read this book, you would be left wondering, why does any of Israel exist? What a horrific place, committing horrific acts on a daily basis. So I think the question is central and key. If Israel has a right to exist, and if your answer is no, then I guess the question becomes, why do the Palestinians have a right to exist? Why do 20 different Muslim countries have a right to exist?
My answer is that no country in this world establishes its ability to exist through rights. Countries establish their ability to exist through force, as America did. And so I think this question of right to Israel does exist. It's a fact. The question of its right is not a question that I would be faced with any other country.
So I think that part was very revealing. Countries just establish themselves by force. That's, basically the might makes the right. That's basically what he's saying.
And they're totally legitimate. They're totally legitimate. It makes North Korea and America the same thing. Both established by force. The same thing.
Absolutely. And Russia's good. And Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, is a great country. This is all back to we talked about this yesterday, and this is all called the Obama equalization of legitimacy of everybody. There's no good, there's no evil, there's no right, and there's no wrong. We're all just basically in it. And if you're successful, you're bad. And if you're a disaster, you're the same as a successful, but you deserve to get some of their success.
Hold on, Michael. Hold on. I got to correct. You said Obama said if you're successful, you're bad. He said if you're successful, you did not build that. That's all he said. Come on.
Yeah, you did it by squashing other people. And the fact that you needed one other person to help you be successful means it would have happened. Tesla would have come out of the blue if Musk hadn't done it. It just would have existed. We would have had a giant electric grid in America for cars. Yeah, I take your point, Kirk. I stand corrected. I sit corrected anyway.
Yeah, and he's dropping so much about the fact that a country has been established by force. He's completely ignoring, well, what was the country based on? What was the history of it? What did it want to achieve? What was it? Who was it established for? And by saying that, yeah, basically all countries are established by force, that it also makes all force legitimate. Basically, if you want to establish a country, then use force, and it's
well. Sorry to interrupt,
country.
but we should also point out that I'm pretty sure Israel was established by the United Nations. It actually wasn't established by. It was one of the few countries that was established by a direction of the United Nations back when the UN wasn't completely corrupt. And what happened was that there was an attempt to annihilate it immediately. So ironically, what he said was counterfactual. And it was one of the few countries, unlike America, which I stand behind and love, and think the American Revolution was the most important event in the history of humanity. But Israel was actually established by a decision at the United Nations in 1947, following the Declaration of Independence, then followed by it for Israel.
And the whole comment about rights, you know, again, and I want to thank all the super chatters, Davey Boy, Jesse Ryback, PC, who said he's a bad guy. Yeah, all you are supporting us, helping to keep these perspectives on the air, you know, day after day after day. I mean, you don't have to be an expert, Michael. You're very astute on the history of Israel, but like, you don't have to be an expert to look at the theocracies, the savage theocracies in all of the Middle East, and then that little strip of Israel, which has, I don't know, one of the biggest gay pride parades in the world, you know, a true rights-respecting democracy. You know, they want to paint it as a theocracy, like, Israel is a Jewish state, Iran is an Islamic state, the same thing. But truth be told, Israel is a rights-respecting democracy, the only one in the Middle East.
Well, just quickly, because I see some people talking about the establishing of the Israel. Maybe because people are saying, you know, when Israel was established, it wasn't in the UN yet. So maybe that's the key. You know, as long as Israel is not in the United Nations, it is sort of like achieving something. Of course, it wasn't in there because, you know, it wasn't established yet. But let's listen to a bit more. I think from now we'll go towards the end, and yeah, it should be interesting.
But you write a book that delegitimizes the pillars of Israel. It seems like an effort to topple the whole building of it. So I come back to the question, and it's what I struggled with throughout this book. What is it that so particularly offends you about the existence of a Jewish state that is a Jewish safe place and not any of the other states out there?
There's nothing that offends me about a Jewish state. I am offended by the idea of states built on ethnocracy, no matter where they are.
Muslim included.
I would not want a state where any group of people laid down their citizenship rights based on ethnicity. The country of Israel is a state in which half the population exists on one tier of citizenship, and everybody else that's ruled by Israelis exists on another tier, including Palestinian Israeli citizens. The only people that exist on that first tier are Israeli Jews. Why do we support that? Why is that okay? I'm the child of Jim Crow. I'm the child of people that were born into a country where that was exactly the case, of American apartheid. I walk over there and I walk through the occupied territories and I walk down the street in Hebron. And a guy says to me, I can't walk down the street unless I profess my religion. I'm with another path. No. I want to. This is very important.
It is
extremely important.
Yeah, let me lay it down.
I'm working with the person that is guiding me is a Palestinian whose father, whose grandfather and grandmother was born in this town. And I have more freedom to walk than he does. He can't ride on certain roads. He can't get water in the same way that Israeli citizens who live less than a mile away from him can.
And why is that okay?
Why is that?
So, you know, when I'm hearing about this, I'm kind of like, yeah, why is that okay? If what he says is true, if Israel is a basically, yeah, what he says, an ethnocratic state, meaning basically only one sort of ethnic group has a citizenship, only one ethnic group or one religious group has a sort of like right to, has basically full rights when it comes to it. And again, I feel like we live in a different reality. What is he talking about? He's talking about, you know, the fact that he says basically, and you know, even when he says something like you cannot even like cross the street, and it's like, yeah, it's like a different, like it's not the same country.
Isn't what he accuses Israel of doing, isn't that like way more true in the Gaza Strip in the West Bank with the PLO and Hamas?
Exactly. Arab citizens have the same legal rights as Jewish Israelis. This is fact. I don't know what he is talking about. I've been to Israel 3 times. This is not a theocratic state. I mean, Kirk, to your point, and he kind of sidesteps it. The interviewer is like, well, what about the Islamic, theocracy of Iran? He's like, well, we'll talk about that later. Let's get back to Israel. There's mosques in Israel. There's atheists in Israel. There's all types of religious belief in Israel. And no one's going to throw you off a building if you say, I believe in a Christian God or no God at all, as they do in most of the Middle East.
Michael?
I mean, what was amazing, he says, you can't be a citizen in Israel. And then he talked about even the Arab citizens. He said that. It is amazing. Now, the Arabs do have a major issue, and that is that when they choose to go to the Israeli Defense Force, and it's not required for them as it is for all the Israelis, but when they choose, and a good number of them do, a reasonable number of Arabs that live in Israel do go to the IDF, they're not allowed to be fighter pilots. That is the discrimination. That is the level of discrimination. And they're also, I don't believe, allowed to be in the secret intelligence service, the 8200 group in the Army. That's the big discrimination that we're seeing. The other thing he neglected to point out is there are actually more jobs and better paying jobs there used to be before October 7th for people who live in the, quote, occupied territories. Another brilliant PR move by the world, and Israel didn't fight back, that used to be allowed to come into Israel. And in Gaza, the same thing. It used to be that they would work in Israel because there aren't any jobs. And the reason there are no jobs in Gaza is because unless you're into tunnel building and bomb production or smuggling across, yes, the Egyptian border with the Philadelphia corridor, you are not allowed. There's nothing for you to do. And there's one last point I want to make, because his whole premise is so despicable. And for the 50% or 51% of women in the population in the world, what are you listening to? And by the way, more women support the, all this jihad crap and all this death to America crap than men. All you need to do is look and watch, you see, but it's slightly more. The point is, you people are being locked in rooms. Have you ever seen a picture in Gaza or even in Lebanon? Look who's running around. Do you ever see a woman? The only time you ever see a woman is when it's a fake staged thing and there are women involved with crying and some dead children or something, which is almost always staged. All right. But the point is that the 51% of the population in the world should be aware that none of these countries, and especially not Gaza, allow equal rights even close to women. It's crazy. The last point is the same thing goes to people that are LGBTQ or whatever you are. You are pushed off building roofs. You are discriminated against. You don't exist. And remember, Tel Aviv is one of the most non-theocratic cities in the world. It has the largest gay population of any major city in the world. It has the largest gay parade in the world. So everything that he says is full of it. But it's the usual anecdote. I found one person who's complaining because they weren't allowed to be a math professor and get their cancer treated in their kid because of the Israelis.
Yeah, I recall there was a piece on The Guardian from like 2011, I think, that was reporting about a resort that was being proposed and planned to be built in Gaza. And if you read the article, it talks about how like Hamas was demanding that the resort segregate the swimming areas by gender and whatnot, to Michael's point about, and that's just scratching the surface. That's probably one of the more mild forms. But yeah, women's rights are doesn't sound like they're respected too well in the Gaza Strip.
The PC, another generous super chat, and thank you so much. And truly, thank you. We are the largest network, the Ayn Rand Center UK, Daniel, Razi, and our team. We are the largest network of information inspired by Ayn Rand's objectivism in history. And so you'll hear us quote what Miss Rand said about the Middle East, what Miss Rand wrote about altruism. Kirk talked a little bit about that. That's our goal, is to hopefully do the best we can as students to apply Miss Rand's ideas to modern day. She had a lot to say about Israel, and you who are regular contributors on every level really help keep us on the air. I was shocked more than anything. In my book, New Textbook of Americanism, there's a great essay about racism. And did he compare U.S. slavery to modern day Israel? Was that in his equation? That the U.S. slavery system, which we had a civil war and the ideas of America overcame, is the same thing as modern day Israel? It's completely backward. I mean, as PC said, no Israeli can safely move to Arab towns. He's talking nonsense. But the point is, I think, as you said, Michael, discrimination is built into the Islamic system. There is no protection of individual rights anywhere in any of these Middle Eastern countries except Israel. But that's the one he's siding with. It's unexplainable, save altruism at all.
Yeah, something I like to mention sometimes is, we are not pro-Israeli first. We are, pro-freedom, we are pro-individual rights, we are pro-freedom of speech, separation of powers, whatever ensures that the human flourishing is basically reaching its maximum levels, whatever allows for individuals to flourish. And yeah, we criticize Israel. Maybe we might even agree on some things. When it comes to Arab, whenever I hear about Arab citizens not being forced to be in the IDF, I never know if I'm supposed to be happy or sad about it, or like if I should be positive or negative about it. Because on one side, okay, good, like millions of people are not being forced to go into military. I like that. On the other side, there is like a different standard for different ethnic groups. I don't like that part. But again, we can we have a certain standard, and we will judge nations based on that. But because even when we disagree about Israel, this is not now, we should just throw out the whole thing. No, as long as you have the means to basically make it better, as long as you have a democratic system, as long as you have a freedom of speech, as long as basically the ideas are allowed to be discussed between people, we can do something better. But this is not something that's happening in Gaza or the Palestinian territories in the West Bank. No freedom of speech, no individual right, no individual rights, no elections. There is no way to peacefully transform the system. You can only use violence. That's the only way you can adapt the Palestinian model for ruling.
And I think before October 7th, if I recall correctly, the big stories about Israel were about the protests against the government for, I think, months and months. And I don't recall reading about how the government in Israel executed dozens, hundreds of people. You read about that about Iran all the time. Every time there's a mass demonstration, weeks, months go by, and then you read stories about how a lot of the activists and protesters were brutally executed, not given a fair day in court and whatnot. I think there has also been stories in the Gaza Strip about how like any protest or opposition to Hamas gets silenced. People go to jail for speaking out against Hamas. So yeah, it's not even in the same ballpark.
And not even before October 7, after October 7, there have been protests I mean, just imagine that a country is in a state of war. Basically, if you just go a few kilometers one way, you are in an active war zone. Yet protests are allowed, basically saying a nation should surrender, a nation should not defend itself, which I think is it's a freedom of speech. It should be allowed. I will criticize the people doing that because I think what they're doing is basically wanting a destruction of the system that allows them to do that. But they have a right to do so because, again, you live in a free system.
I want to roll tape, but I'll just say the way he has set this up for people who are, are younger, not so familiar with the Middle East, have kind of a cursory understanding of what goes on there. They would think that Israel is a slave, master society, and Gaza is this heroic, rights-respecting underdog that, if it wasn't for Israel's evil boot, would be thriving. And the opposite is just the case.
So we have about 50 seconds of the interview, so let's finish that up and then we can continue.
That. Why is there no agency in this book for the Palestinians? They exist in your narrative merely as victims of the Israelis, as though they were not offered peace at any juncture, as though they don't have a stake in this as well. What is their role in the lack of a Palestinian?
I have a very, 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 very moral compass about this. And again, perhaps it's because of my ancestry. Either apartheid is right or it's wrong. It's really, really simple. Either what I saw was right or it's wrong. I am, for instance, against the death penalty. What the person did to get the death penalty, it really doesn't matter to me. I don't care if they were selling a nickel bag of marijuana or if they were a serial killer. I am against the death penalty. I am against a state that discriminates against people on the basis of ethnicity. I'm against that. There is nothing the Palestinians could do that would make that okay for me. My book is not based on the hyper-morality of the Palestinian people.
So I think this interview really showed well the way this works. You repeat the same lies: apartheid, open air prison, genocide. You repeat, things that are bad. You repeat it again and again. You enforce this, and then you basically say, well, because this is what's happening, everything is okay. And that's what he said. It's apartheid. I don't care. I don't care about any context. I've said it's apartheid, and now I can do anything I want. He admitted, he showed clearly, like, how does this work, how basically this propaganda works. Jonathan?
And every time he's given an opportunity to speak, what does he say? My ancestry, just like my family in Jim Crow. So his race, I guess, is a big part of his legitimacy. It's like from the get-go, he is there not as I understand, not as a seeker of ideas, but as a, I don't know, particular part of an ancestry who has a particular perspective on how the world works because of that ancestry. So just that continual needing to go back to his own ancestry to justify his ideas is, to me, it's just racism. Rand talks about, racism as like looking at people like barnyard animals. You got a black one, you got a white one. It's like this is, to me, how this guy understands human beings. Palestinians act one way. People of color act another way. Jews act another way. And it's just, there's no room for ideas in there. It's just ugly racism.
Yeah, and when I was young, I was taught about the boy who cried wolf. When you keep repeating, what Israel is doing, apartheid, apartheid, you have no ability to actually look at what's happening. You just repeat the same thing. Not to mention, if you compare it to Jim Crow, you are undermining basically the legacy of it, what has actually happened. The actual terrible things that have happened under Jim Crow that were allowed to happen, and you are degrading it by saying what Israel is doing by having a nation that everyone has a citizenship, that is living in the actual nation, no matter your religion, no matter your ethnicity, no matter your skin color. Yeah, if you compare these two things, you are completely destroying what has happened under Jim Crow. When you repeat what is that Israel is doing apartheid, you are destroying what has actually happened in South Africa. Michael?
Well, by his model, any Jew shouldn't talk to pretty much anybody, because most people have taken over Israel and that area, Judea, which is named Judea for a reason. And I shouldn't certainly have any German friends, God forbid, and I have plenty of them, and many of my companies are either in Germany or work directly in Germany and Switzerland and so on. It's absurd. It's completely absurd. And the other thing is that if someone believes that selling a nickel bag of marijuana and being a serial killer are equivalent, then I have no time for that person. I'm not interested in that. I've used this analogy before. I'm a doctor. If someone comes in with moderate hypertension and they have cancer, and I want to sit there and focus, well, we're going to spend equal time on the moderate hypertension and the cancer. You're going to be dead from the cancer in 2 months, and the moderate hypertension will take 10 years before you have a stroke. But I'm just like this guy is, and it doesn't really matter to me. You have 2 diseases and they're equal. And this kind of moral is, again, the same stupidity and everything. And the last, I think Jonathan and Kirk both said it beautifully. It also has these so-called victims are never responsible for their failures, ever. It would be like saying Germany wasn't responsible for electing Hitler. It would be like saying Japan wasn't responsible for listening to an emperor who told their pilots to suicide bomb using planes going into ships. By the way, does that sound anything familiar to something that happened more recently? And America decided the way you countered that is to drop 2 atomic bombs because one clearly wasn't enough because the emperor said it wasn't. So when people make a choice to elect and then follow evil leaders, and there are evil leaders, they must and have to suffer the consequences, and they do. And Israel is in a position to make sure that happens. This gentleman has zero rational, philosophical basis for anything he has to say. And whether my ancestors also suffered, my ancestors had to escape from Stalinist work camps in Russia and try to get to America, and they finally did with $0 in their pocket and no fake immigration. I don't sit here and talk about that every day. I look forward.
Kirk?
I think that the real injustice going on here is the fact that we currently have over 140 live viewers and only 14 likes on this video. So if you're watching, if you love the commentary and the content that the Ayn Rand Center UK puts out, don't forget to smash that like button, smash that thumbs up button while you give us a watch.
Thank you, Kirk. So something I just quickly like to mention, because that has been also a big part of the story. Apparently, CBS, so this interview has been done on CBS. It was a morning show. Basically, it was a short 7-minute interview. And afterwards, the person who did the interview has basically the way he conducted his interview has been called into question. It was also said that basically the way he has conducted it sort of broke the editorial guidelines. So I'm not sure how much you guys have followed that part, but I quickly like to check with Jonathan, because you are on different kinds of shows a lot. Do you think the way the interviewer has conducted himself was sort of not something you should see?
Well, as I understand it, and not because I have any special insight, but this gentleman who was the interviewer was on October 7th was kind of publicly dressed down at a network meeting. His reporting was called into question, and this interview has really kind of made the rounds in the media circles because it was pretty challenging, which is something that, is it Coates or Coates has never really been held. I mean, most of his interviews I think are very handheld, very warm and welcoming. So I think it was completely a fair interview. He handled it, I don't think pretty well, but it was a completely fair interview. But yes, the reporter has been called into question for perhaps being too harsh, too one-sided. This is journalism. I thought it was a completely fair interview, and you want to see more of that. I mean, people can write these books, but let's see more critical analysis and holding these propagandists' feet to the fire.
Michael? Do you want to say anything, Michael?
Yeah. Yeah, and I completely agree with Jonathan. I mean, this notion that every opinion is equally valid and that you don't want to analyze things. I know it comes from our current humanities groups at most of the universities, and everybody's special and everybody has their truth and their own point of view and so on. I'm saying it cynically on purpose. I believe the rigors of good analysis should be put just to the social sciences, just the way we have to do it to the physical science and the biological sciences. If you want to start from an idea that Allah is great and that Islam is all that matters, and if Sharia law is the most important thing, and if you want to form a constitution that says we exist to annihilate Israel, which is basically what the charter, I shouldn't say constitution, the charter of Hamas says, it's not basically, it is what the charter of Hamas says, then you should expect that the people living under that regime are going to come under significant scrutiny and criticism. And if I went and I said that I exist to annihilate a group of minorities, and from the river to the sea on that minority, of course, I would have all kinds of lawsuits and defamation, and every righteous person from CNN and MSNBC and the Washington Post and so on and so forth would jump all over me. Of course they would. But when it comes to Israel in this situation, both with Gaza and with Hezbollah, you get a very different situation. What this journalist did, I was proud of him. I was shocked it was on CBS. He may need to find a new job because this is not what CBS wants to tout these days. They want a handheld in college. Oh, it's too bad for that poor Gazan who no doubt was an astrophysicist and worked all his life and never supported the notion that we should kill all the Jews. He never supported that, I'm sure, and never trained his kids to do that. That's the way he wants to do history. He should have that opinion, but I don't want to subscribe to it, and I think it is despicable and needs to be shut.
Yeah, and I think the integrity of the interviewer has been called into question, and I think again, it is sort of disgusting, is because he recently, or he did convert to Judaism, so he's now Jewish. He basically did convert, and I believe 2 of his kids are living in Israel. So basically, that makes it that you cannot be objective about this, and yeah, that sort of way is always used. We still have 2 more videos. Kirk, anything you'd like to add?
No, let's move on.
Jonathan?
Quickly, I mean, he makes this big thing about he's against the death penalty, right? He's against was I hearing that? He's against the death penalty, kind of holds himself out as that's my morality. I'm against, we're supposed to say, oh, he's a really good moral guy. But like, you don't have to look too far on social media to find, I believe, legitimate photos of public hangings all over the Middle East. And my sense is that they don't have really great, fair, objective trials before they hang these people up from, people movers and, big bulldozers and shit like that. So, I mean, like, again, he is, Dr. Peikoff once had this line that I'm paraphrasing, but out of context, anyone can prove anything. So he's going to prove that Israel is bad and the Palestinians are good, but remove the entire context in the process.
Well, there's someone else who also says without context you can prove anything. So let's listen to a short clip from on the interview he did on Trevor Noah show. This is Trevor Noah, so there was something he said I think is interesting. So let's listen a bit to that.
Let me ask you a question about, like on a human level. I honestly have to ask you this because I very seldom get angry on people's behalfs. But man, we haven't been able to stop talking about the CBS interview.
Wow.
We and I mean, when I say we, I don't just mean the people who make this podcast.
Yeah.
I mean like my friends, people online,
Really?
people.
Yeah.
And
I'm totally off.
Oh, you really?
Yeah,
let me
I'm
tell you
totally
something.
off.
Oh, you're off?
I'm completely off.
let me fill
People
you
are
in.
not happy about that.
I mean, I'm
Oh.
obviously hearing this from other people.
Yeah,
Friend,
yeah,
let me fill you in. Let me fill you in. I don't think you understand the shockwave that interview created. Not because of what you said, but because of the way people felt like you were treated. Just the opening salve of that conversation.
Right.
And I'll never forget the question that you get asked, where I think it's Tony who says to you,
When I read the book, I imagine if I took your name out of it, took away the awards and the acclaim, took the cover off the book, the publishing house goes away, the content of that section would not be out of place in the backpack of an extremist.
yo, I sat there. I don't get flabbergasted by much.
Right.
I genuinely don't. I sat there and I was like, what? My first thought is, yes, but if you remove every context from everything, then everything could go anywhere. You know what I mean?
Right.
If you remove America's history and America's journey, America's this, then it's like, yeah, those people who fought against the British, they were terrorists.
Right.
You know what I mean? You can call it like, the Boston Tea Party. That's terrorism.
Yeah.
If you remove the context, everything has no context. And
So I just want to quickly talk about the context that was removed. The context that was removed was his name, his awards, and nothing about the actual book itself. Again, sort of like saying, and the fact is that book removes all the context. He said it. He doesn't care. Basically, he was called out. Like, do you think you are not providing the Israeli side? He says he doesn't care. He's just looking at he's basically just writing a propaganda. He's writing a propaganda for the Palestinian cause. That's what he set out to do, and that's what he's written. And he's been called out for it. So, yeah, Jonathan, you mentioned
I mean, it's such a kind of clever sleight of hand on Noah's part, 2 different uses of the word context here. And, if you took Ayn Rand's name off any of her essays, and you gave them to someone, they would be floored by them because of the material, because of her ideas. But I think a lot of what this writer rides is his position, is his perspective. He's the young voice of the downtrodden. He knows BLM. He knows everything. His ancestry informs it all. So, I think this interviewer's point was, look, this is pretty radical information. This is pretty radical material. And you're legitimizing it because of that context you bring to the table.
Michael?
Great question.
Yeah, I'll bring up the elephant in the room. I know this is unpopular, but this gentleman, I believe, is a strong supporter of BLM. And I have one question for him, because I think it's very relevant to his context, which is a word that was pretty well invented by the former president of Harvard, because anything is appropriate in the right context. I want to know how the lives of Blacks have improved since BLM riots during COVID and defund the police and all the associated things. I think people should go look at the data and ask yourself whether these amazing social movements that stood for the downtrodden have actually resulted in any improvement and any improvement in the lives and the economic stature of folks, and also the crime rates. My understanding is it's all quite the contrary. And many of the cities where they rioted the most to show they are in deep trouble. The point is that nobody rises up and improves unless you teach. There's a saying, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime. You cannot fix a chronic problem with an acute fix. It doesn't work. The fundamental problem in Palestine and Gaza is not that the Israelis left in 2006 and left them to their own devices. It's not because the Israelis left and now the Israelis stand on their border and we stand on ours. And there are a lot of countries that have borders. I mean, the US is trying to, and depending who's in charge, it may or may not have a border. But generally, countries are supposed to have borders. That's why we call them countries. So there's a border between Gaza and Israel, and it's a very tough border because people in Gaza have taken an oath to destroy Israel. But the context of this whole thing is with a foundation that leads to focus on destroying somebody else rather than life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, or reason, purpose, and self-esteem, to use Rand's sort of even more fundamental version of that. There is nothing in Gaza that is going to lead to anything that will help the plight of the average Palestinian. And this, I would challenge anyone to come up with a counter argument to that. In fact, I would argue that for almost all of the Muslim-based countries, these theocracies which this gentleman so vehemently opposes, which are essentially every Muslim country, show me what foundational philosophy exists in those Muslim countries that is very different than Gaza and will lead to the flourishing of the general population. He could write the same book about every Muslim in every other country and not be able to blame Israel for any of it. And yet he chooses not to, because God forbid he go to Tehran and see how they treat women and beat the people who oppose the regime. You cannot improve people's lives by blaming somebody who's standing on their side of a border.
And yeah, just quickly, when he talks about, the idea that you cannot even cross the street because, that's the Israeli part, I have to say, I do agree with him. Oslo Accords were a mistake. We really shouldn't have established Palestinian territories. We shouldn't have established different borders. It should have stayed the way, it shouldn't have stayed the way it was. It should have been basically the Palestinians, if you could even call them that at that point, should have been properly integrated. The fact that the radicalization of the people has happened, and the fact that that has happened because of the Israeli reluctance to basically enforce their rule, the fact that they didn't do with the Arabs in Gaza and in the parts of the West Bank, the fact that they didn't do the same thing that they did with the Arabs in the Israel proper and have given them full citizenship, the thing that has been done with the Golan Heights that have been fully annexed and the people that were giving citizenship. I see Bonnie in the chat mentioning UNRWA. The fact that UNRWA has been allowed to operate in the territories, which we now know has been basically fueling the next generations of the Palestinian children to commit their lives to hating Jews. Kirk?
One thing that confused me, I think you're right, Daniel, when you said that, like, there's a rich irony of Trevor Noah talking about removing context when that appears what they're doing. And when he brings up what was it, the Boston Tea Party, he says, well, that was terrorism. I'm like, okay, so are we just putting the Boston Tea Party and throwing a bunch of tea into a harbor that's like in the same ballpark as what Hamas did on October 7th and what Palestinian Islamic Jihad did on October 7th and all the suicide bombings that have happened over the last few decades? And it's all the same to him. Is that the message I'm getting? The Sons of Liberty, the founding fathers, and their goals and aspirations are the exact same as Hamas, who are a bunch of genocidal maniacs wanting to impose a theocracy. That, like, those are the same. Again, it's for him to, like, accuse others of wanting to remove context. He seems to be guilty of doing the same thing.
So we have one last clip, which has actually been the most viral clip of all. So I wanted to keep it for the end. It's about a minute long, so it should be quick to go through. It's just Nehisi talking. So let's listen to this one.
And I haven't said this out loud, but I think about it a lot. 20 years old, born into Gaza, which is a giant open-air jail. And what I mean by that is, if my father is a fisherman and he goes too far out into the sea, he might get shot by somebody off of, a side of Israeli boats. If my mother picks the olive trees and she gets too close to the wall, she might be shot. If my little sister has, cancer and she needs treatment because there are no, facilities to do that in Gaza, and I don't get the right permits, she might die. And I grow up under that oppression and that poverty, and the wall comes down. Am I also strong enough, or even constructed in such a way where I say, this is too far? I don't know that I am. I don't know that I am.
So, I mean, again, when he mentioned the fact that there are no advanced healthcare in Gaza, I wonder why. I wonder if some party had a chance to establish maybe a decent place to live in, and where did that money go? I think there was a lot of money going into Gaza. I wonder what it was used for. And the fact that if you were there, that hate would for some reason go towards the Jews rather than who is actually ruling over you, who you voted for, who you had a chance to do something about. And the whole also thing, that if you get too close to the border, you get killed. If you just you pick up pears or something and you just get shot. It's the border is very clear, and the sort of like a no-go zone is like 300 meters. You don't go on a walk and you suddenly find yourself in Israel. I'm really well, he hasn't been in Gaza, so I guess I cannot judge on how much he would know about that. He's only been to East Jerusalem.
Well, I mean, total fantasy, right? That Israel is just out there picking off any opportunity they can to shoot a Palestinian. That is complete fantasy. That does not happen. To me, what's the most sickening thing is, you guys remember the movie The Purge? And he's basically saying that, he would go out in The Purge. If given the chance to go out there and completely wreak havoc and throw off all of his, priestly, moral brilliance, he would go out there and butcher in that certain situation. So it's really, that's how low he thinks of himself, that he would join in the absolute assault and run through and, I don't know, maybe pick off a couple of hostages or something like that. It's it's so sickening that it's actually even worse than what you had described, Daniel.
Yeah, I mean, the way he sort of said it, maybe he just watched that episode of Rick and Morty when they find themselves on a purge planet, and when they did, they said, I might as well actually participate because we're here. That sort of, and I think it's appropriate that it comes to a comparison like that because of such a cynicism. The fact that you cannot think of anything better to do. You cannot think of maybe establishing a sort of a better system. No, the only thing you can think about is killing Jews, because Like, that's the only thing that October 7 is about. Michael?
This is nothing new. There are, and we know some of the Congress people on the far left were applauding 9/11. They didn't admit to it, but they didn't admit they didn't, or they didn't disagree. There are people that believe that destruction somehow leads to prosperity. And it's not clear to me. I mean, they're this sort of super communists, I guess. They believe that you just need to redistribute the wealth. They forget that wealth is created, and if you destroy its creation, you don't get any more. But this is a great argument for these people. He's shouting, globalize the intifada. What he finished up with was death to America, death to Israel, globalize the intifada, and let's cheer on people that as soon as he said something against the regime, they would kill him or put him in prison. And I've said this before, I love the journalists who love to glorify these corrupt regimes, which are terrific because they often speak in favor of them, but they will slip up very soon. And as soon as they do, as soon as they say one thing against the regime, they're done. And as I've said before, never listen to people who are touting their own suicide. I mean, it's crazy. These people are despicable. They don't know how to build a country. They don't want to do the work it takes to build a country. It's very difficult work. It's a lot easier to scream about what everybody else has done, criticize, and tear things apart. It's a lot easier to blow stuff up.
Yeah, I mean, something that I don't think will surprise you. He has openly said that 9/11, he didn't feel much sorrow for 9/11 when it happened.
Exactly.
Kirk?
Exactly.
I had something to say, and I don't know. It just went right out of my noggin. So I apologize. I don't have
I'll just
much
jump
at the
in and
moment.
say, I mean, he seems to leave viewers with that sense, that comment as, hey, if you engaged in some of those acts out there, he wouldn't necessarily hold it against you. He is kind of morally saying, hey, if you're in a tough situation and you go butcher a couple of Jews, hey, man, I get it. You know, I can understand. I mean, he is giving cover to future. He's actually not even giving cover. He is idolizing and glorifying future acts of terrorism because, hey, we all know that. I mean, I remember when October 7th, I thought, what could it take me to do to cut off the head of a human being? Even my greatest enemies in the world, what could it take to make you as a human being butcher a human being? And he's basically saying, hey, man, you got to understand how tough we've had it. Disgusting.
I remember what I was going to say. You know, he brought up he's, concocting these notions of the poor Palestinian farmer just stumbled across the border and then got shot in the head or whatever. I'm pretty sure what happens way more often is that Hamas will indiscriminately launch rockets at Israel. Some of them will just not make it far enough and then land in the Gaza Strip and kill innocent Palestinians. And again, where's the outrage over that?
Or 6,000 of them crossed the border, and none of them were picked off initially when they crossed. I mean, his analogy was actually so ridiculous in the setting of October 7th. His discussion that people can go close to the border and be shot in the context of October 7th is crazy, right?
Yeah. So I believe everyone has to run. So let me just quickly, Jonathan, where can any last thoughts if you have, and where can people find you?
Well, I'll just remind people, we have 167 people watching. So many of you are monthly subscribers on YouTube, like Ta-Nehisi Smith, Best Monster, Jesse Ryback, Enric. Enric said, Daniel, I'm going to let you read some of these wonderful super chats, but £5 a month, £10 a month really means everything to us. We are churning out content. We are really one of the true radical voices on this issue. Commentators like Michael, Kirk, so many other experts. So thank you for being part of our mission to spread Miss Rand's ideas. And one of my contributions is a new textbook of Americanism. You know what makes Miami wealthy and Cuba dirt poor? It's not the water. It is the ideas. Ideas move the world, and American ideas should move the world. That's what's in the book. And thanks to all of you for making it possible.
Michael, any last thoughts, and where can people find you?
No, couldn't agree more. And Kaufman 2F's LinkedIn.
Kirk?
Go Tigers.
And we also have a last-minute super chat from Mary. Thank you so much. And Enric, who says, Ta-Nehisi says, constructed in such a way that Gazas are determined without free will by oppressors. Yeah, I mean, that's something the interviewer have said, that the way he's saying, he basically saying the Palestinian people have no agency. They are just a result of the forces acted upon them and can just not choose better.
Yeah.
All right. And with
What,
that,
what a bleak view of the human mind, of human reason, especially in the internet age where they're all waving around their phones and they could be watching the Ayn Rand Center UK.
and with that, thank you guys for joining me today. Thank you everybody for watching. We'll see you tomorrow with another episode of The Daily Objective. Thank you and bye-bye.